What's up, you beautiful people? This is Gary Horne, and this is Pro Wrestling. It's a podcast celebrating the past, present, future, history, legacy, and tradition of the greatest sport of all time, professional wrestling. And as usual, I'm not alone. I am joined here by Mr. Will Martin. Hey, Will.
Hello. Good day or evening, everyone, whenever you're listening or partaking in this goodness. We are glad you're here.
I assume afternoons. So
okay.
Yeah. Don't listen to this after 7 because it gets kind of weird. It'd be up all night.
Don't eat directly after listening to this.
Right.
Wait like an hour.
And the main reason we say that those are doctor's orders coming directly from the doctor himself, the Doc Rob Stinson. Hey, Doc, how are you?
That's right. And my recommendation would be to listen to this first thing in the morning. Start your day off at the gym when you're using the Nick Aldis training regimen or the Eli Drake training model or whatever one. But when you're getting yourself better and you need something to help get you through that workout, something that's going to entertain you, inspire you, motivate you, first thing in the morning. Drop this joker at 5 a.m.
I'm currently on that Bam Bam Bigelow workout regimen. That's my program.
So are you tattooing your head? That's the only thing.
No.
Okay.
I'm on the 1986 era Jim Cornette training regimen. Look at that physique.
It's a swimmer's body if I've ever seen one.
He's beautiful. He's a beautiful man. Well, fellas, I'm glad we already name dropped all of these names because surely they are all names we'll be discussing further in depth in the future. I'm excited, and I think you guys are. This is our this is our introduction to what is going to be, I think, our flagship This Is Pro Wrestling show. It's not that I'm taking credit here, but even from when I first started This Is the NWA back in the day, one of the things I envisioned was being able to go and dig into the history and, just from the intro, you get it, like the history, legacy, tradition, that whole thing of sports, of the greatest sport of all time, pro wrestling. And so when Will and Rob came on, that was also an idea of theirs. Rob's been hammering us about it because when you have a beautiful mind like Rob's, you want to take full advantage of it. And so now we finally get to do it. He's beat us down enough that we're here, we're sitting down, and we're actually recording the introduction to what will be the flagship show. This is Pro Wrestling. I don't even think we have another name for it. It just is what it is. And it's a show about what is pro wrestling. It's I think I'm thinking the emphasis, I guess, if you guys have a better way of saying this, is just like we'll talk about the history of pro wrestling, just a guide to all of you out there on what pro wrestling is all about, characters from pro wrestling, anybody involved in just incidents, matches, just whatever comes to mind, just important things that come from the world of professional wrestling. Did I say that as confusing as possible?
No, I think you're exactly right hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is for everyone. I mean, if you know nothing about pro wrestling, we're going to give you the context to understand it better. If you've been a fan of pro wrestling your whole life, you're going to appreciate the conversation and the depth at which we discuss this stuff. So, and I've always wanted to be a part of a flagship, so I'm excited. I've never been on a flagship before, and so this is a first for me.
This is what it looks like.
It looks the same, but anyways.
You refer to me as a beautiful mind, and so I'm wondering, do you think my brain is physically beautiful, or are you referring to the fact that I've got various different personalities going on up here?
Spoken like a true doctor.
Hey, actually, shut up. You shut up. Oh, anyway,
who are you talking to?
I was talking to me.
Mind is just what I call your butt. So that's
okay.
It's just a lovely.
Well, wait a second. When you were talking to Tanya the other day after our show, you said, "Hey, what a beautiful mind."
I sure did.
Okay, I see.
Yeah,
he told me that he'd like to smack that mind.
My mind or Tanya's mind?
I'm open to suggestion. And I've heard that you guys are open as well, so it works out.
Now you put it correctly, though. I mean, I think we want to do this, and the reason we listen. I mean, for those who follow our live broadcast, we come in and we do hours a week of live broadcasting, hanging out with our community. Not because, I mean, it's because that we're into pro wrestling, obviously, but I think there's also a sense in which we feel that culturally this is an important thing. Wrestling is an important thing. It's mythology, it's experience, it's human drama, it's counseling, it's all those things. It's performance art, it's creativity. I don't want to speak for everybody that follows us or everybody on this panel, but we're going to get more into our personal story. But I'm, one of my personal commitments is I'm a Presbyterian. And so my faith informs a lot of not necessarily how I behave, but definitely what I think and how I operate in broad strokes. And I think that one of the things that really makes us,
not how he behaves.
one of the things that makes us distinct and unique is we bear this image. We reflect something about God in us. And I think what that must be is probably the creative impulse, the desire to be involved in creating and experiencing. And so to me, this is just, it's a human interest thing, and it's an important endeavor. And so hopefully we will have fun with this. You'll be entertained. You'll laugh. Maybe you'll cry. You'll be frightened from time to time. But I hope it makes you see something about the goodness and the privilege of what it means to be a human being, that we get to experience what really is. You got a lot of great sports out there, man. Baseball, football, American football. But pro wrestling is, as Marty Bell said in one of Gary's great interviews, it is the penultimate form of art. And so when we experience and talk about this, we're sharing in human drama, human creativity, human competition, human art. It's a beautiful thing to go with my beautiful mind.
There you go. And you can hear, and the way that Rob talks about it, you can hear the passion in his voice about like what he's talking about with professional wrestling. And for me, one of the big things about this is we wanted to put something out for all of you folks that are listening in the audio portion, or even if you're watching right now on video. What we're thinking about is we found in the world of pro wrestling, for one thing, this is hundreds of years old, like this thing, as you're going to find out in episode 1, where we go back and talk about pro wrestling. And it could be a little bit overwhelming if you're a new person. And there's a lot going on now that people that have been fans that got lost along the way don't understand what's going on now. And then it's easy mythology to get lost in, or the storylines and everything about it, just the timeline. It can get confusing and all of that stuff. So I think we wanted to kind of step in and talk directly to you folks in a way that, I guess the easiest way I could put this is I think we want to remove all of the gatekeepers. We don't want there to be any limited access to anything about pro wrestling. We want to tell the story in the easiest way possible, hopefully, so that in a way that you folks that enjoy the history of pro wrestling, you might have been a fan in the 70s or the 80s, maybe the 90s, you can enjoy everything we're going to talk about and maybe learn something that you didn't know about the older eras or the newer. And also, if you're just brand new to pro wrestling and you've always just kind of wondered, what is pro wrestling? Why does anybody care? Isn't it fake? All of that stuff, maybe you'll get something out of it too and feel like you can jump right in, and then along the journey start to feel like you fully understand it and can have a conversation with anybody about pro wrestling. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I guess the operating principle that you should have when you go into this, you think wrestlers, we know there are stereotypes about who are wrestling fans, and you got everybody from the uneducated, toothless redneck to the very sophisticated, creator of musical bands, and writers of literature that are drawn to this. It just speaks to everybody who's a person, and everybody should be able to be privileged to access it. I don't care if you're a toothless redneck or not. If it speaks to you, then that's a good thing. And what I would encourage you to do is when you approach wrestling, remember it is supposed to be entertainment. So don't overthink it. We're going to go into a lot of deep things, but one of the things that the three of us dislike about wrestling in some of its current forms is that it's really overthought on the booking aspect, from the booking perspective. They do too much and try to accomplish too much when at base wrestling is a story, and it's a story that is about a couple of themes in human history and human life existence. It's about the theme of competition, it's about the theme of ambition, and it's about the theme of conflict. And that's really what it's about. And we can all identify with that. We've all read ancient mythology. We've all read, stories from comparative religion and the Bible and, some of the great works of fiction. This is wrestling is something that you should not be ashamed to appreciate. It's something that has great literary merit, great cultural merit. And if you look at the people that we really appreciate, people like Nick Aldis, people like William Patrick Corgan, people like Thunder Rosa, the names that we mentioned, these are highly, highly educated people that know their stuff, and so this is something that I think can speak to everybody across the spectrum.
I'm sorry, Rob. I'm not trying.
No, you're good, but you get what I'm saying.
No, 100%. I totally agree. And I think one of the things you'll hopefully take away from this that we hit on is we'll dig deep into eventually the term kayfabe and what all of that means, and the entertainment aspect of this sport. But I feel like the whole world's wrestling, the whole world's kayfabe, the whole everything, politics to just people you meet day to day. I'm just saying it's all wrestling is not any different than all of that. You guys are going to find out.
And I'll piggyback off what Rob said a little bit and add my 2 cents. The other part for me is that there's varying levels of wrestling fans too. There are some people that are like us and they want to dissect it. They want to get in there. They want to figure out, how the wheels turn and the business side of it and all this kind of stuff. And then there's, on the other side, there's people that just want to watch it and be entertained, people that just want to enjoy it for what it is. It's kind of like a movie. There's some people that just want to watch the movie and get lost in it, use it as a form of escapism. And then there's some people who want to dissect it and talk about the film shots and the script and the actors and things like that. And so wrestling, has varying levels of fans at various depths. And that's one of the things to know and appreciate too. When you talk about gatekeeping, it's kind of this way with any sport. I mean, I'm a sports fan. Primarily I like soccer, but I'm also a big baseball fan. And I go through phases where I want to know all the stats. I want to know, who's getting drafted. I want to know all this kind of stuff. And then I go through phases where I'm just like, I just want to watch a game and enjoy it. I don't want to get lost in batting averages and all that kind of stuff. So, that's another aspect of wrestling that I feel like needs to be acknowledged as well, is that, no matter what depth level you are as a fan, you're welcome here.
Yeah. And, and not to waste all of your time, but to piggyback on what Will's saying, I just want to reestablish, like he said, no gatekeepers here, though. If you are a person who has watched wrestling your whole life, we want this show to be for you. Like all fans, like all sports, I should say, all fandoms, there are toxic fans. We get it. So where I was going with that is we don't want you to feel left out if you're a longtime fan or if you've seen one match in your whole life and it was Hulk Hogan versus The Rock at whatever WrestleMania that was. If you're like me and you don't even know what WrestleMania that was, you can't remember. Nobody should be able to give you crap about it. It's okay. If you've seen a match at all, or even if you haven't seen a match and it just intrigues you, the idea of pro wrestling, this is going to be a show for you. This is for everybody. Don't feel left out in the cold. If you have questions or thoughts, we want to hear from you. We're at TIPW Show on everything. So we're open. We want to hear your stories. Speaking of stories, I guess I'll start really quick to give you an idea what I'd love to hear from you. We just want to introduce ourselves so you know who's going along on this journey with you real quick before we get to the actual first episode. My name is Gary Horne. I'm a lifelong pro wrestling fan. I started one of my earliest memories in the entire world is walking into the living room at my parents' house and seeing Andre the Giant rip the gold cross necklace off Hulk Hogan's chest. And there was a scratch on Hulk Hogan's chest. And I remember thinking these men are giant because I think, you saw Bobby the Brain Heenan there, and even Hulk Hogan towered over him, and Andre the Giant towered over Hulk Hogan. And I just could not fathom the size of these people. And he ripped the necklace off and it cut him. And that just blew my mind. That legitimately is one of my very first memories, but I was hooked. I was sold on whatever pro wrestling was. And through the years, I've watched it, never stopped watching it. I've loved it for forever. Just something about it just grabbed me. And I think it's just the stories, the fun. And I'm not as hard as some people are on some of the goofy characters. I do like to feel like I'm invested. But I also come from a day and age where I loved the hell out of Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6. So, and I believed in the Ultimate Warrior being just a raging lunatic. And it turns out he really is. But besides that, he also played one on TV and he was very good at it. But anyway, that's kind of where I come from with pro wrestling. And so I don't really know what else to establish about that. But Will, I guess I'll throw to you. Like, where do you start out with pro wrestling, and who are you as a fan? Who are you as a person?
Yeah, I start out in the early 90s. I was born in 82. So I was, kind of 8-9 years old when I first got into wrestling. And honestly, it was because of the accessibility of TBS and that it came on cable television. And so I'd be flipping channels and got into it. My dad had been into it in the 80s, the late 70s and early 80s before I was born. So he had some context. He kind of got back into it. He took me to a few WCW house shows, and I just got hooked, man. I was a WCW kid. Unfortunately, I was a little late and kind of missed the late heyday of the NWA and that whole transition with Jim Crockett and everything. So when I first got into wrestling, it was, WCW Saturday Night and WCW Main Event, and a little bit before Nitro and all that started up and the Monday Night Wars. But by that time, I was full into it. And I've always been a huge Sting fan. He's kind of the guy that when I think of my childhood in wrestling, Sting's the guy that stands out. So obviously I'm really excited to see him reemerge here as of late. But I kind of, when I got to college and probably late high school, I went through a phase that probably a lot of wrestling fans go through if they were fans as a kid, where it's like not cool to like wrestling anymore, right? Rob mentioned like the stereotypes and the stigmas surrounding wrestling fans. But the problem was I quit watching it. But you can never really take the wrestling out of your soul. If you're a true pro wrestling fan, and it's like there's always that void, right? And so by the time I hit really like 30, probably 29 or 30 years old, I just jumped back in with both feet, and I jumped back in specifically to WWE because by that time, obviously WCW had dissolved. WWE was all that I was aware of. So I was into that pretty big for a few years, and then kind of opened my mind up to Ring of Honor, New Japan, and all of that eventually led me down a path to where I discovered the NWA. And I really discovered the NWA through you, Gary, because you started this podcast, originally called This is the NWA. And so I just spent some time kind of binge watching this new iteration of NWA, and it was like, it pulled me in a whole nother rung. And then joined this show, and obviously have gained a new appreciation for the wrestling community that we've built. And so now, I love the wrestling, but almost even more than that, I love the community. And when it comes to what I appreciate about pro wrestling, I'm like a philosophy storytelling kind of guy. So I don't necessarily get hung up on the technical aspect of move sets and that kind of stuff. I really enjoy creative storytelling. So a lot of the inputs you'll hear me give will be about philosophical insights on, does a storyline make sense? Like, where should it go logically, or that kind of stuff. So that's typically where my head's at when I'm watching pro wrestling.
Nice. Well, Rob, you're the last one. You're the doctor. You're going to be our go-to, like our fact checker, our historical accuracy judge, all of those things. So let's get a little background on you. What's your story with pro wrestling?
Well, I'm the elder statesman in the group. I'm probably the oldest NWA fan of anybody. So I was born in 1976. So that makes me a good decade older than my two colleagues here, and my wife, and the current world's heavyweight champion, Nick Aldis. my brother and I grew up, we relied on each other. We had a really tough childhood. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to sit here and sob, but my childhood was very fun and very unsafe, because
it's too early to start crying, Rob.
Right. We could get into anything because, we had parents who had demons and they loved us. They weren't cruel to us or anything like that. But our parents were they were alcoholics, and my dad was a heroin addict, and my dad was like Captain Jack Sparrow. He'd disappear for 2 years and show back up, and when he ever showed up, it was a big time. We had a great time, but then he'd disappear again. But my earliest memories are of my dad taking us to see pro wrestling in Murray County, Georgia. I remember going to see the Fabulous Freebirds, and I remember Buzz Sawyer being there that night, and Tommy Wildfire Rich, and those back in when I became aware. I've been watching wrestling since 78, 79, but I became really aware around like 81, 82, even before Ric Flair was a big deal. I mean, we knew he was going to be a big deal, but in those days, it was all about Tommy Rich, man. He was what was dominating the NWA in the state of Georgia. And anyway, as we grew up and as 82 turned into 83, and then we get to the year 86, which is really a very important year. I think maybe the greatest year in professional. That's the year that really caught me. What was going on between the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express, between Dusty and Flair, Dusty's Ric Flair's campaign in the Great American Bash, defeating the title like 13 times in 30 days. That was it. That was the full court press, and that's what locked us in. But more importantly, it really is what saved us, because my brother and I literally had no guidance. Like, we didn't have anybody. Again, let me emphasize, my parents were not mean. They had demons, and we what drew us inside, what kept us off the street is like what Eddie Kingston says. The reason we didn't get in trouble on the streets is because we had to be in at 6:05 on Saturday night. We had to be, we were glued to the TV at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. Then you had World Class at noon. We got a little bit of WWF on Sunday, but for the most part, we weren't leaving this, between that and the Atlanta Braves baseball that would come on at usually 7:05 or 8:05. We were glued to the TV, and my heroes growing up were like, now in retrospect, I look at it back like they were guardian angels. They were father figures in a sense. They taught us our life lessons. They taught us our ethic. We lived the Cold War through the Magnum TA and Nikita Koloff feud. I mean, it was really, so it's very sentimental. And because of that, it's very important to me, as something that kept me safe in my formative years. I've always been a bookworm. I've always been a nerdy type, and now we're living in the golden age of nerds. Nerdy has finally become cool after all these years of bullying and this and that. But I have a scar. If you look real close, people who've been real close to me, like Will and Gary have, they've been up in it, man. Not like, but I have a scar on my forehead right there. You can barely see it, but it's right over my left eye.
And I didn't even know you were awake when I was. That's so weird.
I got that scar when I was 6 years old, and my brother and I were impersonating a wrestling match. He was being Tommy Rich, and I was being Ric Flair. And in the course of the match, I got pushed down and I hit a bed rail. Had to get 16 stitches, and I've carried that scar ever. Luckily, I'm told chicks dig scars, so my wife, the beautiful Tanya, loves it. She thinks it makes me look like a beast, which I am. But right. But it's just like wrestling is life, man. Like there's never been a point in my life when I wasn't a wrestling fan. I don't know what life was like about it. The NWA just happens to be. I'm an NWA fan by an accident of geography and where I grew up at, kind of like Will. And for me, like, I remember watching the 30 for 30 episode on Ric Flair. I remember the commentator saying something to the effect of, he really liked Hulk Hogan, but he felt Ric Flair. And that's the way I feel about it. I felt it. It resonated with me. I can identify with the stories. It kept me out of trouble. It motivated me to get through the week. I look forward to Saturday every week. I was always a good student in spite of everything, and went off to grad school, and even during my doctoral work, wrestling always factored in. Even as I was, going through my dissertation process and going through doctoral classes, I'd always draw analogies and allusions relating to pro wrestling, and I've always pushed the fact that wrestling is important. It's literally and culturally important. And then when Lightning One took over, Gary Horne began this fabulous podcast. This is the NWA. And for the first time in many, many years, after going from the NWA to the transition to WCW to the Impact days, to the Wilderness years, to all that stuff, finally, for the first time, I felt like I was seeing something again that brought me back to what I remembered and how wrestling should be. And I was listening to Gary's show. I listened to all his interviews. I would listen to the podcasts they would do. And who would have known that here, about a year ago this time, maybe a little bit less than that or a little bit more, I think it was about March or April, me and Gary and Will teamed up and started doing this and started this fantastic journey. Got to be part of this amazing community that we now feel like we're like kindred spirits and family. And it's important. It's important to my family in real life. And everybody at school that I know, they always know, like, don't be dissing pro wrestling, man. Stinson will not tolerate that. You guys may not know this, but we're getting a resolution passed for real in the state legislature. The Georgia Senate is going to adopt a resolution declaring a day of honor for the National Wrestling Alliance for its contributions to the culture and the history and for making Georgia one of the great entertainment centers of our country. And those are all because it's all true. It's about pro wrestling. It's about all the things that we've talked about as far as human interest and human themes. But it's like Will said, it's about our community.
Beautifully said, Rob. I love every bit of that. And, it's funny you say due to geography, like I grew up in South Georgia, but we only had like 3 channels on through our antenna. But for some reason I was a WWF guy. Like I that's what I could see. And I remember like every once in a while being able to catch NWA stuff or WCW stuff, but it wasn't as easy to access until a little bit later when we finally got satellite. And but anyway, I'll date myself. Real quick lightning round. I'm just going to go around the room here, and we'll wrap up the introduction period and get on to the first episode. But because I was a WWF fan growing up, my all-time favorite wrestler is Bret the Hitman Hart. Who is your favorite wrestler, Will?
The Enforcer, Arn Anderson. I know I said I was a Sting kid, but in my older, wiser years, and I look back and I relive those times, Arn Anderson was like the glue, the television champion that just held everything together. He was reliable. I love the Enforcer, man.
And you, Rob?
My all-time favorite wrestler is Ric Flair and Nick Aldis. And Nick Aldis is very much in that vein. And then I guess my all-time favorite tag team would be a toss-up between the Fabulous Freebirds and which included 4 members. We'll get into that later, I'm sure. We'll do a whole
that'll come
a whole
up,
episode.
Sure. And the Midnight Express. The Midnight Express, particularly Loverboy Dennis and Beautiful Bobby and Sweet Stan Lane with the great, incomparable Jim Cornette, one of the greatest personalities of all time. Those are my favorites.
I didn't know we could say 7 wrestlers.
I'm surprised you didn't come out with a tag team. Well, I thought you would start with that.
Well, I thought that was
it's because I said favorite wrestler. Yeah, maybe we'll go tag teams. Because I'll take your Midnight Express and tell you that they're good, but they couldn't handle the power of the anvil, baby, the Hart Foundation.
Oh,
but
you're sticking with it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
it's tough. It's like I want to ask also the question favorite match, but I hate that question because I can never think of anything when I say it. But then again, I would probably say like Bret Hart, Stone Cold at WrestleMania 13 . But what about you guys?
Let me ask, Gary, before we move to why what is it about that match? Because it's usually the matches are great, but oftentimes because of who we are and our own stories, there's usually something about the match that makes it important to you. Is there something in particular that makes that match the one?
I think with that one, it would be. It just caught me off guard at the time of how good wrestling storytelling could be. I know I had seen other stuff before, and there had been like great stories in wrestling, but the way that we went in there and Bret the Hitman Hart being my favorite wrestler of all time, and seeing him go in and get Stone Cold, and Stone Cold used to like just irritate the hell out of me. Even when people started like loving him, I would look at Bret Hart as like the honorable one, like the ring tactician. He's well trained. He's a guy who proves that if you put everything you've got into something, you could be the top dog. And, I just believed in him. I really believed in Bret Hart. And Stone Cold was this guy just going around and pushing people around and being a bully. And somewhere along the way, people started really digging Stone Cold and getting really annoyed by Bret Hart. And I couldn't wrap my brain around it. And then when they got to that match, by the time they got there were like little moments of like, I would see Bret the Hitman Hart get to the point where even for me, he would kind of rub me the wrong way. Like, all right, you're being a little too high on yourself. Like, calm down a little bit. And, like that. Oh, Bret, don't say that. That doesn't make you sound good. Like, don't, that kind of thing. And then by the time you get to that actual match, in the process of the match, for those of you who haven't seen it, I mean, you see a full switch for both guys in the middle of the match, like that, where Bret is just so frustrated by this guy and him being successful by bending the rules and pushing his way in, and just trying to take something that Bret doesn't feel like he's earned. And Bret feels like he's the superior guy, but Bret's always done it the right way. And this guy is still like making a name for himself and coming in there, that like Bret just, something snaps and Bret just starts bending the rules. Like he starts getting a little weird and pushy in the match and mean and more aggressive. And he tries to use that to beat this guy, playing almost his game. And then you find out the guy he's trying to beat with it, Stone Cold, not only does he take it all, he won't give up. No matter what Bret Hart does to him, he can't beat him. And he even gets him in the final submission hold, the one that he always wins with, the one that's like the greatest submission hold of all time, the sharpshooter. He's going to put him out. And he always wins this way. This is how the good guy wins. And this guy just will not die. He will not give up. And he just ends up passing out in the middle of the ring. And Bret snaps and he loses it. And he like goes crazy, starts attacking him, just like, and you see Bret Hart go from like beloved babyface good guy to the reviled heel. And then Stone Cold, by that effect, also becomes like, this guy's got a lot of heart. He pushed through it. There's something else to him. There's another side. And it just like kind of, I don't know. Anyway, I could ramble all day about this match, but you get the idea. It was just like, it was such complex, like just multi-layered storytelling going on all through that feud. And it was just the first time it ever hit me, I think, that you could do that in a wrestling ring.
Yeah, I have a hard time answering that question too. I mean, honestly, for me, it's probably going to be a tag team match, and it's usually like one of the most recent ones I've seen because it's just fresh in my mind. I know recently, in the past few months, we watched Midnight Express versus the Southern Boys. What was that, Rob? Starrcade '89.
Correct. I think so.
That one. See, like I said before, for me, it's about the storytelling. So. That match just told a story, and similar to the one that you just mentioned, Gary, I wasn't into that at that same time. But for me, it's probably going to be a tag team match, and it's probably going to involve either the Steiners, the Road Warriors, or the Midnight Express.
What about your favorite tag team, Will?
Steiner Brothers.
Okay.
I remember Dean Ambrose, by the way, when we watched that match, just to jump in there, he said, John Moxley is what people would know him as then, but I remember seeing a quote of him as Dean Ambrose talking about that match. And he said that compared to everything you'll see in wrestling today, that match is advanced trigonometry. And I just always loved that phrasing for him.
Yeah. Shoot, man. For me, the greatest match of all times was July 26, 1986, the Great American Bash, Ric Flair versus Dusty Rhodes. Even though Flair dropped the title that night in the steel cage, this was right in the middle of that amazing tour, that Great American Bash tour. And it was a time when like there was a sense in which Flair was always overmatched, and he was on the verge of losing, but he just had this sense of invincibility at the time. Like he could not be beat. I remember him cutting this promo one time, and it's always stuck with me. I wish I could find it. I know it exists. I remember it distinctly. I hear him saying something and I may be misquoting, but he says, he says something like Dusty Rhodes, right? He may have been referring to Ronnie Garvin or somebody. He comes out and he says, Dusty Rhodes, when I walk out here week after week and say I can't be beat, I'm lying because I've been beaten once in the last 10 years, and he just turns this defeat into like a badge of honor and stuff. And it's so good. But I remember Flair wearing those purple, those lavender trunks, some say periwinkle. And Dusty Rhodes being in there, winning the title. And of course the in-ring celebration, it was very reminiscent of the celebration that Flair himself enjoyed in the cage when he defeated Harley Race at Starrcade 83. I also like the way that the WWF or WWE has packaged this when they do their documentaries on Dusty Rhodes and Flair. They highlight this match, and they play that David Glenn Isley song "Sweet Victory" behind it. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's like he's like don't ever look back on the world closing in. Beyond the only attack with the wings on the wind. And they're
don't sing it all, Rob. We got to
keep going. Keep going.
Bonus. No, we got to save that for the OnlyFans.
Okay, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right.
People got to pay for that.
Hey, if and when we do launch a Patreon or whatever, there's going to be weekly karaoke with Rob, and he's going to pick one song every week. So that's something that you guys have to look forward to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you talk about a Greek myth right there, man. You talk about a clash of Greek gods, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, both at the absolute peak of their game. And what an amazing match. It's just, it didn't end the way I wanted to. It was actually, I remember being disappointed at the time, and we would always find out the results weeks later, except when it appeared in the newspaper. In those days, it would be in the newspaper. And I remember my brother getting hands on it first. He's like, "Do you know what happened?" I was like, "Yeah, I already found out. Flair won. He won. I knew he won, but he hadn't. He had lost, in fact." And I was lying to my brother. And of course, Flair won it back.
And that was the first instance of fake news, actually.
Yep.
Rob invented it
in recorded history.
And now evidently it's but anyway, Flair would go on to reclaim the title as he always did in short order, like August the 9th, something like August the 6th, August the 9th. He got it back, and but that is my favorite match of all time. Go watch it. It's beautiful.
Well, so there's some match ideas if you're new to pro wrestling. I can't imagine that a lot of people listening to this or seeing this right now are going to be like brand new to pro wrestling. But if you are, there's some match suggestions from history that you can go check out, and some stars you could even start off with. Waste your time forever with going over this stuff, but that was also to establish that the credentials are real, people. We're real fans. We're real people. We love pro wrestling, and we want to take the journey and find out all about pro wrestling and everything there is to know about it. And we probably never will seek or reach the end of that goal, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But we're certainly going to try, and we hope that you will come on the journey with us. That is Will Martin and the Doc Stinson. It's at This Is Dr. Stinson, at This Is Will Martin, and at This Is Gary Horne. The show is at TIPW Show everywhere. This is on all the social medias. You can find us. Hit us up. Tell us if you're excited. Tell us what you want to know more about so we can plan future show ideas. And just we want to be encouraged by your thoughts and see what you think. Guys, did you have anything else to add for the prologue episode of this?
Just don't expect this every episode to be this sentimental. Okay, we're gonna have fun. We're gonna laugh a lot. Try to just inspire you. And wrestling is so good. Again, like we said earlier, don't overthink it, guys. Enjoy it. Have fun. Be refreshed by it. And we appreciate you coming along with us.
Yeah, and I'll just say thanks for listening or watching, however you are consuming this content, and just reiterate that this is really all about community. This isn't about a platform for three dudes to sit and talk at you about wrestling. It's to interact. So interact with us on social media, join our Discord, and join the community.
Yeah, and Rob makes a good point. Both of them do about the sentimentality, and you heard stories from us, but we just wanted to kind of give you a feel of who we are as people as we dive into episode number 1. But there won't be I'm sure they'll come up. It won't be all just like us talking about matches you haven't seen. In fact, we're going to take you back in episode number 1 to a time where there hadn't been any matches yet. We're starting at the beginning of pro wrestling, and we're going to walk through our first series of shows. Is going to be a timeline walkthrough, guided tour through the history of professional wrestling. So if you ever wondered how it got started, where it ended up, how we are now, you're going to find out in this next series. And we're starting out literally at the beginning.
And by the beginning, we mean like the foundations of the world. So, and take this hint here, Will. So when you come along with us, we recommend you bring your Bible.
Bring your Bible.
Which would be pro wrestling. Just a few of the resources that we rely upon in building this. Obviously, we're not born with this knowledge, but there's some references that we would be remiss if we did not recommend as we prepare to this. You want to get your hands on a copy of what we call the Bible, which is Pro Wrestling FAQ by Brian Solomon.
Absolutely.
If you can get your hands on a book that we will be doing some deep dives into, the great Tim Hornbaker's National Wrestling Alliance, The Untold Story of the Monopoly That Strangled Pro Wrestling. There's also a fantastic source. It's actually really good. It's a really good source, and it is called The Comic Book Story of Professional Wrestling. Don't be thrown off by the comic book aspect. This is a good source, and it's well-informed. And in fact, there's a lot of things in here that even Brian Solomon, a lot of the figures and illustrations that even Brian Solomon relies upon in his scholarship and stuff like that. It's a fantastic book. And then we'll refer to some of our friends have done some deeper research when we get into eras like the NWA during the Wilderness years or during the TNA era. We'll be referring to the blog that Alliance puts out quite a bit. They do some great things over there. Our friend James Lawrence has an amazing resource that's focused on the history of title belts. We'll obviously allude to him because through his work, he's become kind of the title belt authority in our community and family. And then there are others that do other things. But as far as the books that you want that are going to be helpful, here's your homework, guys. Here's your textbooks for this class, this graduate level excursion into fun and pro wrestling. Pro Wrestling FAQ by Brian Solomon, The Comic Book Story of Professional Wrestling, and Tim Hornbaker's National Wrestling Alliance.
Love it. Yeah, definitely want to give a shout out to those books. Those are things we're going to be relying heavily on as we take this journey. We hope you're going to tune in for episode 1. Hope we haven't bored you too much talking about ourselves. Promise, starting this next episode, we're diving deep. We're going all the way back to the beginning, the roots of pro wrestling. And we hope you'll stick around for that. But until then, we hope you enjoy your gravy cake.